The hum of the Boeing 7777 was a familiar lullaby, but today it was a prelude to chaos. Captain Rick Mallory, a man whose arrogance flew higher than his aircraft, made a call that would nosedive his career. "Ma'am, this area is restricted. I need you to leave the cockpit immediately," he sneered, his eyes dismissing the black woman before him. He expected compliance, maybe a muttered apology. He didn't expect the steel in her voice, the badge flashed with authority, or the 5 words that would ground his flight and ignite a firestorm. "This aircraft isn't going anywhere." The pre-dawn chill of Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport was a familiar embrace for Captain Richard "Rick" Mallory. 48 years old, with a jawline as rigid as his adherence to what he considered his cockpit rules, Mallory moved with the unearned swagger of a minor king surveying his domain. He'd been flying for Global Sky Airlines for over 2 decades, his record clean, if only because his sharp tongue and dismissive attitude often intimidated junior crew into silence. He was in his own mind the epitome of a captain, decisive, authoritative, and always right. This morning, Flight 327 to London Heathrow was already shaping up to be an irritant. A slight delay in catering had pushed their departure time back by 15 minutes, a minor inconvenience that nonetheless pricked at Mallory's notoriously thin skin. He completed his walk-around of the massive Boeing 777-300ER, its twin General Electric GE90 engines gleaming under the harsh ramp lights, and grunted his approval to the ground crew. Satisfied, he ascended the jet bridge, his mind already calculating fuel burn and cruising altitudes, eager to be airborne and away from the terrestrial annoyances of airport bureaucracy. The aircraft registration N779GS was one of Global Sky's newer additions, and Mallory felt a proprietary pride in commanding such advanced machinery. As he stepped into the hushed, dimly lit cabin, First Officer Kenji Tanaka, a younger, more amiable pilot in his late 30s, was already in the right-hand seat, methodically working through the pre-flight checklist. "Morning, Captain," Kenji offered, his tone respectful but neutral. He'd flown with Mallory enough times to know that idle chit-chat was unwelcome. Tanaka Mallory clipped stowing his flight bag. He settled into the captain's seat, the familiar array of screens and switches, a comforting landscape. "Let's get this show on the road. Weather over the Atlantic looks a bit choppy around FL 350. We'll see if we can get a smoother ride at 370. Just as they were about to call for cockpit door closure, a figure appeared at the entrance. A woman mid-40s, impeccably dressed in smart business attire. A tailored navy blazer, crisp white blouse, and dark trousers. She was black, her hair pulled back in a neat bun, her expression calm and observant. She carried a slim leather briefcase. Mallory, who had a particular aversion to what he termed pre-flight sightseers or overly eager officials in his sacred domain, immediately bristled. He didn't recognize her from the gate crew or airline management. His eyes quickly scanned her for an airline ID, a familiar airport authority badge, anything that would immediately place her. He saw none prominently displayed. "Can I help you, ma'am?" he asked, his voice dripping with forced politeness that barely masked his irritation. He prided himself on running a tight ship, and unscheduled visitors to the flight deck, especially minutes before they were due to push back, were a disruption. The woman smiled faintly, a professional but unreadable expression. "Good morning, Captain First Officer. I'm here to observe the flight deck procedures for this departure." Her voice was even, carrying a quiet authority that Mallory instinctively disliked. It wasn't loud, but it had a resonance that suggested she was accustomed to being heard. Mallory exchanged a quick, exasperated glance with Kenji, an observer on his flight without prior notification that had reached him directly. He considered them an unnecessary distraction, often auditors or junior management types trying to tick boxes. Or worse, someone from a department he had no respect for trying to justify their paycheck. Observer, Mallory's eyes narrowed, raking over her from head to toe in a deliberately dismissive manner. He saw a professional woman, but his internal biases, long unchecked, were already painting a different picture. He didn't see an aviation professional of equal standing. His mind, clouded by years of unchallenged entitlement, registered her appearance and gender first. He'd had observers before, usually older, usually white, usually male, and always in his experience deferential to his rank. They would typically present their credentials immediately upon arrival, often with a slightly apologetic air for the intrusion. This woman's calm self-possession irked him. "Yes," she confirmed, stepping just inside the cockpit threshold, her gaze taking in the instrumentation, the crew, the general readiness. Her eyes lingered for a moment on the MCDU multifunction control and display unit, where Kenji was inputting flight plan data, then swept across the overhead panel. "With all due respect, ma'am," Mallory began, his tone shifting from strained politeness to open condescension. "This is a critical phase of flight preparation. We're already slightly behind schedule. Perhaps you could liaise with the ground staff. They can find you a seat in the cabin." He was already dismissing her, assuming she was in the wrong place, or at best, a low-level functionary who had somehow wandered past the gate agent. The woman's smile didn't falter, but her eyes hardened, almost imperceptibly. "I assure you, Captain, I am exactly where I need to be. My credentials allow me access." She didn't offer them immediately, a subtle power play that Mallory, in his arrogance, failed to recognize as anything other than defiance. Mallory felt a surge of proprietary anger. His cockpit, his flight. He prided himself on maintaining absolute authority. He wasn't accustomed to being challenged, especially not by someone he'd already mentally categorized as an outsider, an interloper. His gaze flickered to her dark skin, a silent, ugly prejudice stirring in the recesses of his mind. He wouldn't have admitted it, not even to himself, but it was there, coloring his judgment, fueling his irritation. He decided he'd had enough. This woman, whoever she was, needed to be put in her place. He unbuckled his seatbelt with a decisive click, a clear indication of his rising impatience, and a physical act designed to assert dominance. "Ma'am," he said, his voice now laced with a distinct edge of command, the kind he used on unruly passengers or slow ground crew. "I appreciate your enthusiasm, but the cockpit is a secure area, and frankly, your presence here unannounced to me is unusual and distracting. I'm going to have to ask you to leave. Now." First Officer Tanaka shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He recognized the signs. Mallory was escalating. Kenji had seen this behavior before, though usually directed at junior flight attendants or gate agents over minor infractions. He'd never seen it directed at someone who had so calmly asserted their right to be there, and certainly not someone dressed in a manner that suggested official capacity. He shot a quick, almost imperceptible glance at the woman, a silent apology for his captain's brusqueness. He briefly considered intervening, suggesting Mallory check her credentials, but a warning look from the captain silenced him. Kenji knew the price of contradicting Mallory. A barrage of abuse, followed by a scathing report. The woman stood her ground, her posture unwavering. The quiet authority she had carried in with her seemed to solidify like a shield, deflecting Mallory's aggression. "Captain Mallory, is it?" she asked, her voice still even, but now with an undertone of something steely, something that hinted at power held in reserve. "It is," Mallory confirmed, crossing his arms, a belligerent set to his jaw. He was now standing towering over her, slightly trying to use his physical presence to intimidate. "And I'm the captain of this multi-million-dollar aircraft with over 200 souls on board, and I'm telling you respectfully to vacate the flight deck. We have a schedule to keep, and I don't have time for this. My first officer will call security if you don't comply." The respectfully was a sneer, a mockery of politeness. He expected her to protest, perhaps argue, or finally intimidated retreat. He anticipated a minor scene, a brief delay, and then the satisfaction of having asserted his dominance once more. He would probably file a complaint about lax ground security, allowing unauthorized personnel to approach the cockpit. He was utterly unprepared for what came next. He couldn't imagine the storm that was about to break, a storm ignited by his own arrogance and prejudice. He didn't know that his carefully constructed world, built on years of bullying and quiet discrimination, was about to come crashing down around him, starting with the calm, measured words of the woman he was trying to eject. The woman let the captain's threat hang in the air for a beat, her expression unreadable. Captain Mallory, puffed up with his own importance, mistook her silence for acquiescence, a prelude to retreat. He even allowed himself a small, almost imperceptible smirk. First Officer Tanaka, however, felt a knot of dread tighten in his stomach. There was something in her composure, a deep, unshakable stillness that signaled this was far from over. Then slowly, deliberately, the woman reached into her blazer's inner pocket. Mallory watched a flicker of impatience crossing his face. Was she finally going to show him some flimsy ID he could dismiss? Instead of a company badge or a simple airport pass, she produced a sleek, dark leather wallet. She flipped it open, not with a flourish, but with a quiet, definitive motion. Inside, nestled against a backdrop of official-looking fabric, was a gold shield gleaming under the soft cockpit lights. Above it, in clear, embossed lettering, were the words, "Federal Aviation Administration." "Captain Mallory," she began, her voice still calm, but now infused with an undeniable weight of authority that seemed to suck the air out of the cockpit. "My name is Althea Harris, and I am a Federal Aviation Administration Safety Inspector. My credentials, which you were so quick to dismiss, grant me unrestricted access to all areas of this aircraft, including your flight deck, at any time announced or unannounced, as per Federal Aviation Regulation Part 167. Mallory's smirk vanished, replaced by a look of stunned disbelief. His face, moments before flushed with self-righteous anger, began to pale. The color drained from his cheeks as if a tap had been opened. FAA, he'd dealt with FAA inspectors before, routine ramp checks, occasional line checks. They were usually identifiable from a mile away, often with prior notification. This was different. He had not just been rude, he had actively tried to eject a federal officer from his cockpit. Kenji Tanaka sucked in a silent breath. He'd seen FAA IDs before, but Inspector Harris's presentation, combined with Mallory's egregious behavior, made this moment extraordinarily charged. He could almost hear the tumblers of fate clicking into a new, disastrous combination for his captain. Inspector Harris continued, her eyes locked on Mallory's, unwavering. "My observation today, Captain, was intended to be a standard line check, focusing on crew coordination and adherence to standard operating procedures during departure. However, your conduct in the last few minutes has given me serious cause for concern." regarding your judgment and fitness to command." Mallory, for the first time in what felt like years, was speechless. His mind raced, trying to find a way out, a justification, an excuse. Arrogance warred with a sudden, cold wave of fear. He'd overplayed his hand catastrophically. I didn't see your identification," he stammered, his voice a mere shadow of its earlier, confident bluster. It was a weak defense, and he knew it. He hadn't asked for her identification. He demanded she leave. "You didn't ask, Captain," Inspector Harris corrected him coolly. "You made assumptions. You were unprofessional, discriminatory, and frankly abusive." The word discriminatory hung in the air, heavy and damning. Mallory flinched as if struck. "Discriminatory? That's a serious accusation. I was merely concerned about security and the schedule. Your concern for the schedule seemed to outweigh your concern for federal regulations and basic professional courtesy, Captain," Harris retorted. "And your immediate escalation, your condescending tone, and your attempt to physically intimidate me suggest a deeper issue than mere scheduling concerns." She paused, letting her words sink in. "Given your aggressive behavior and your clear disregard for established protocols when interacting with an FAA official, even one you failed to properly identify, I am not confident in your ability to operate this flight safely or professionally." Mallory's world tilted. This couldn't be happening. A simple line check, gone, this horribly wrong. Inspector Harris then delivered the blow that would send shockwaves far beyond the confines of the cockpit. "Therefore, Captain Mallory, I am officially grounding this aircraft pending a full review of this incident. You will not be flying today. In fact, you will not be flying any aircraft until the FAA has completed its investigation." "Grounding the aircraft," Mallory choked out, his voice hoarse. "You can't do that. We have over 200 passengers. We're already delayed. This will be a disaster for global sky." He looked desperately at Kenji, as if seeking an ally, but Kenji was studiously avoiding his gaze, his face pale. "I can, and I am, Captain," Inspector Harris stated, her voice leaving no room for argument. "Passenger safety and regulatory compliance supersede airline schedules. My primary concern right now is the clear lapse in judgment you've displayed. It calls into question your suitability to be in command." She then turned slightly towards First Officer Tanaka. "First Officer, please inform the gate agent that Flight 327 is indefinitely delayed due to unforeseen operational circumstances. Advise them that there will be a crew change. No further details to the passengers at this time. I will speak with your airline's Director of Flight Operations momentarily." Kenji, though visibly shaken by the turn of events, nodded. "Yes, ma'am." He reached for the radio, his hand trembling slightly. He couldn't quite believe what he was witnessing. Captain Mallory, the untouchable tyrant of the skies, was being brought down hard. Mallory, meanwhile, seemed to deflate. The fight went out of him, replaced by a dawning horror. His career, his reputation, his meticulously crafted image, all crumbling before his eyes because of his own monumental misjudgment. He sank back into his seat, no longer the commanding captain, but a man facing a terrifying abyss. "You're making a mistake," he mumbled, more to himself than to Inspector Harris. "A huge mistake." Inspector Harris regarded him with a cool, appraising look. "The only mistake made here today, Captain, was yours. When you assumed I was just a black woman, you could order around. When you prioritized your ego over your duties. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have calls to make." She stepped out of the cockpit, leaving behind a stunned First Officer Tanaka and a thoroughly broken Captain Mallory. The hum of the Boeing 777, once a sound of impending adventure, now seemed to echo with the silence of a career in free fall. The door clicked shut, and the real drama was only just beginning. Passengers would soon be stirring, wondering about the delay. Airline management would be scrambling, and Captain Rick Mallory was about to learn the full meaning of the phrase, "Actions have consequences." The initial wave of karma had struck. It was swift, brutal, and entirely of his own making. But this was just the first tremor. The earthquake was yet to come. The moments following Inspector Althea Harris's departure from the cockpit of Flight 327 were thick with a stunned, almost unholy silence. First Officer Kenji Tanaka, after making the terse call to the gate agent, "Atlanta Tower, this is Global Sky 327. Advise operations, we have an indefinite ground hold. Pilot request, stand by for further." Finally looked at Captain Mallory. The older pilot was ashen-faced, his usual ruddy complexion replaced by a sickly grey. He stared blankly at the instrument panel, the vibrant displays, mocking him, with their readiness for a flight that would not happen, at least not with him at the controls. The swagger, the arrogance, the sheer, unadulterated confidence that had defined Rick Mallory for decades had evaporated, leaving behind a hollow shell. Captain Kenji ventured his voice quiet. Mallory didn't respond immediately. He seemed to be replaying Inspector Harris's words, her calm, cutting pronouncements. She can't do this," he finally muttered, his voice lacking its usual conviction. "Ground the whole damn plane? For what a misunderstanding." Captain Kenji said, choosing his words carefully, "She's FAA. From what I understand, they have pretty broad authority in situations like this, especially if they perceive a safety risk or a regulatory violation." He didn't add, or blatant discrimination and abuse of power, though it was screaming in his mind. "Safety risk? I am safety." Mallory slammed a fist, albeit weakly, on the glare shield. 25 years. Not a single major incident. And she calls me a risk because I asked her to leave my cockpit. His voice was rising, a desperate, cracking imitation of its former boom. "You didn't just ask her, Captain," Kenji reminded him, a new quiet firmness in his tone. He'd endured Mallory's tirades and petty tyrannies for too long. Seeing the man so utterly dismantled was unnerving, yet a small, unbidden part of him felt a sense of grim satisfaction. "You ordered her. You threatened her with security. You were pretty aggressive." Mallory winced, the truth of Kenji's words hitting home. He knew deep down that he had crossed a line. His temper, his prejudices, his ingrained belief in his own untouchability, they had finally conspired to bring him to this precipice. Outside the cockpit, the news of the indefinite delay, attributed to unforeseen operational circumstances, began to filter through the cabin. Flight attendants, led by a seasoned purser named Sarah Jenkins, tried to maintain calm, but the lack of concrete information quickly bred anxiety among the passengers. Murmurs turned into frustrated questions. Business travelers fretted about missed meetings in London. Families worried about connecting flights and holiday plans. Back at the gate, the Global Sky Airlines station manager, a harried man named David Chen, was in damage control mode. The cryptic message from the flight deck had been followed by a call directly from someone identifying herself as FAA Inspector Althea Harris. The call was brief, professional, and chilling. Flight 327 was grounded. Captain Mallory was to be stood down immediately. A replacement crew would be required. No further details were provided to Chen, other than an assurance that Global Sky's Director of Flight Operations, Captain Ava Rostova, would be contacted by the FAA shortly. Chen felt a migraine beginning to throb behind his eyes. Grounding a fully boarded 777 was a logistical nightmare. Gate space passenger, deplaning, reaccommodation crew, rescheduling. The costs, both financial and reputational, would be immense. And for a pilot to be stood down by the FAA on the spot, that was virtually unheard of, reserved for the most egregious violations. Meanwhile, Inspector Harris had found a quiet corner in the Global Sky Operations Office near the gate. Her first call was to her direct superior at the FAA's Atlanta Flight Standards District Office, FSDO. She relayed the events concisely, the routine line check, Captain Mallory's aggressive and unprofessional conduct, his discriminatory language, and attempt to remove her from the cockpit, and her decision to ground the aircraft and suspend his flying privileges pending investigation. Her superior, a veteran FAA man named Marcus Thorne, listened without interruption. When she finished, there was a pause. "Althea," he said, his voice grave, "you're sure about the discrimination aspect? That's a heavy charge." "Positive, Marcus," Harris affirmed. "His entire demeanor changed when I, a black woman, asserted my right to be there. The condescension, the dismissal, the immediate escalation, it wasn't just about an unannounced observer. It was targeted." His exact words were, "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to leave, now," followed by threatening security. This was before I even had a chance to state my full purpose or present credentials which he never requested. "Understood," Thorne said. "You made the right call. Safety and professionalism are paramount. If a captain is compromised in his judgment to that extent on the ground, we can't trust him in the air. We'll support your decision. File your initial report ASAP. We'll need to formally notify Global Sky at the corporate level. This is going to be big." Big was an understatement. Within the hour, the news had rocketed up the Global Sky Airlines corporate ladder. Captain Eva Rostova, the director of flight operations, was a formidable woman, a former pilot herself, known for her no-nonsense approach. She was in a senior management meeting when her phone buzzed with an urgent summons. The initial sketchy details she received made her jaw tighten. A grounded 707, an FAA inspector. Allegations of misconduct against one of her senior captains. Rostova's first action was to dispatch a replacement crew for Flight 3227, a difficult task on short notice for a long-haul international flight. Her next was to try and reach Captain Mallory. His phone went straight to voicemail. She then called Kenji Tanaka. First Officer Tanaka, Rostova's voice was clipped professional. "This is Captain Rostova. I need a clear, concise account of what happened in that cockpit. No opinions, just facts." Kenji, still shaken but composed, recounted the events: Inspector Harris's arrival, Mallory's immediate hostility, his demands for her to leave, the refusal to check credentials, the escalation, and finally Inspector Harris identifying herself and grounding the flight. He recounted Mallory's exact phrasing as best he could recall. Rostova listened intently, her expression grim. Tanaka's account, delivered in a calm, factual manner, painted a damning picture of Mallory's conduct. "Understood, Tanaka. You are to cooperate fully with Inspector Harris and any subsequent investigation. A replacement captain and first officer are en route. You will likely be interviewed formally later today. For now, secure the cockpit and await further instructions from the ground staff." "Yes, Captain Rostova," Kenji replied. The passengers of Flight 327 were eventually deplaned, grumbling and confused with vague apologies about crew issues and promises of reaccommodation. The aircraft N779GS sat silently at the gate, a multi-million-dollar monument to one man's spectacular failure of judgment. Captain Mallory, meanwhile, was finally escorted off the aircraft, not by security, as he had threatened Inspector Harris, but by a grim-faced Global Sky Operations Supervisor. He walked through the terminal like a man in a daze, the usual buzz of the airport a distant roar. He was instructed to report to the airline's local headquarters at Hartsfield-Jackson immediately. As he made his way there, the weight of his actions began to truly sink in. This wasn't just a slap on the wrist. This was a full-blown crisis with him at the epicenter, the FAA, discrimination. His career, which he had always considered unassailable, was now hanging by the thinnest of threads. The word discrimination echoed in his mind. He'd never considered himself prejudiced, not actively. But had he been? Had his annoyance been so much sharper, his reaction so much harsher, because Inspector Harris was a black woman who hadn't immediately kowtowed to him? The uncomfortable truth began to prick at the edges of his consciousness. The initial shockwaves had hit. The flight was grounded. The passengers dispersed, the airline scrambling. Inspector Althea Harris had stood her ground and asserted her authority, and Captain Rick Mallory was about to step into the first formal stage of an investigation that promised to be anything but routine. The karma was just beginning to gather its momentum. The Global Sky Airlines regional office at Hartsfield-Jackson was a bland corporate space, but for Captain Rick Mallory, it felt like a tribunal. He sat in a sterile meeting room, the silence broken only by the hum of the air conditioning and the occasional distant rumble of a landing aircraft, a sound that now felt like a taunt. Across the table sat Captain Eva Rostova, Director of Flight Operations, her expression unreadable but clearly conveying deep displeasure. Beside her was a stern-faced HR representative, Ms. Anya Sharma, and a legal counsel from the airline, Mr. Ben Carter, whose presence underscored the gravity of the situation. Mallory, after a few hours to process the initial shock, had begun to reconstruct his narrative. The fear was still there, a cold knot in his stomach, but his ingrained arrogance was reasserting itself, twisting facts to fit a more palatable version of events. He was the victim here, he decided, a victim of an overzealous FAA inspector with an agenda. Captain Mallory Rostova began, her voice devoid of warmth. We have a very serious situation. An FAA grounding allegations of unprofessional conduct and potential discriminatory behavior. I need to understand, from your perspective, exactly what transpired this morning. Mallory cleared his throat, attempting to project an air of wronged dignity. Eva, it was a complete misunderstanding, blown entirely out of proportion. This, Inspector Harris, she entered my cockpit unannounced right before pushback. She was evasive, didn't immediately present credentials. In the interest of security and maintaining schedule, I asked her to leave. Standard procedure for an unidentified individual in a secure area. She claims you didn't ask for her credentials, Rick. Rostova interjected, her eyes narrowed. She claims you were immediately hostile and condescending. That's her interpretation. Mallory scoffed a little too quickly. I was firm, yes. Authoritative, as any captain would be, when faced with an unexplained presence on the flight deck moments before departure. If she felt intimidated, that's on her, not me. My tone was professional throughout. Ms. Sharma, the HR representative, spoke for the first time, her voice calm but firm. Captain Mallory, Inspector Harris, has alleged that your conduct was specifically discriminatory, that your reaction was based, at least in part, on her race and gender. How do you respond to that? Mallory bristled. That is an outrageous and baseless accusation. I am not a racist. I treat everyone the same. My only concern was the security of my aircraft and the efficiency of the operation. Her race or gender had absolutely nothing to do with it. She's playing the victim card to justify her own unprofessionalism. Mr. Carter, the lawyer, leaned forward. Captain First Officer Tanaka's initial statement to Captain Rostova largely corroborates Inspector Harris's account of your interaction. He noted your immediate escalation and failure to request identification before demanding she leave. Mallory's face tightened. Tanaka. He'd forgotten about Tanaka's perspective. He'd always considered his first officers as extensions of his own will, or at worst, silent observers. Tanaka is young, Mallory said dismissively. He might have misconstrued the situation. Perhaps he was intimidated by her FAA status once she revealed it. Rostova's patience was clearly wearing thin. Rick, let me be blunt. The FAA doesn't ground aircraft and stand down senior captains for misunderstandings. Inspector Harris has initiated a formal investigation. Global Sky is also conducting its own internal review. Your flying duties are suspended without pay pending the outcome of these investigations. Without pay, Mallory exclaimed, the financial implication hitting him for the first time. Eva, that's not fair. I have a mortgage expenses. What's not fair, Rick? Rostova countered, her voice like ice. Is a captain of this airline potentially bringing its reputation into disrepute through unprofessional and possibly illegal behavior? What's not fair is the disruption to hundreds of passengers and the significant costs incurred by this airline because of your actions. The meeting continued in this vein for another hour. Mallory stuck to his story, a mixture of self-justification, denial, and deflection of blame onto Inspector Harris. He portrayed himself as a diligent captain, unfairly targeted. He subtly, and sometimes not so subtly, attempted to discredit Harris, painting her as inexperienced, oversensitive, or having a personal vendetta. Meanwhile, Inspector Althea Harris was meticulously compiling her official report at the FAA FSDO. She detailed every aspect of the encounter, the time, the location, the exact words exchanged as she remembered them, Mallory's demeanor, his physical intimidation, and her assessment of his fitness to fly. She also noted First Officer Tanaka as a witness. Her superior, Marcus Thorne, reviewed the draft. This is thorough, Althea. His attempt to discredit you is a classic defense tactic. We need to be prepared for him to fight this tooth and nail. I anticipated that, Marcus, Harris said. People like Captain Mallory rarely accept responsibility. They believe their rank and experience grant them immunity from scrutiny. Thorne nodded. We'll also need a formal statement from First Officer Tanaka, and we should check Mallory's training records, any past complaints, anything that might indicate a pattern of behavior. This isn't just about one incident anymore. It's about assessing his overall suitability. The FAA investigation moved with methodical precision. An official notification of investigation was sent to Captain Mallory. A formal request for records and cooperation was sent to Global Sky Airlines. Kenji Tanaka was interviewed by another FAA inspector later that day. He was nervous but truthful, recounting the events exactly as he witnessed them. He confirmed Mallory's aggressive tone, his failure to ask for ID, and the general unprofessionalism of the interaction. He also admitted under questioning that he had witnessed Captain Mallory behave in a bullying or dismissive manner towards other crew members in the past, though never to this extreme, and never with such immediate and severe consequences. He specifically recalled an incident a few months prior at Charles de Gaulle Airport in Paris, where Mallory had berated a young female gate agent to the point of tears over a minor paperwork discrepancy. While seemingly unrelated to the current charges, it helped paint a picture of Mallory's typical demeanor when he felt his authority was challenged or when dealing with individuals he perceived as subordinate, particularly women. This previous incident, now officially noted, added another layer to the investigation. Was Captain Mallory's behavior a one-off lapse in judgment, fueled by stress, or was it part of a deeper, more problematic pattern? Inspector Harris, anticipating Mallory's defense, began to think about other avenues. She knew that discrediting the accuser was a common tactic. She needed to ensure her own conduct was beyond reproach and that every piece of evidence was meticulously documented. She also started to consider if there were other systemic issues at Global Sky that might have enabled Mallory's behavior to go unchecked for so long. As the days turned into a week, Mallory remained grounded. The initial shock wore off, replaced by a simmering resentment and a growing desperation. He hired a lawyer specializing in aviation law, a slick, expensive attorney named Julian Vance, known for his aggressive defense of pilots against FAA actions. Vance immediately went on the offensive, issuing statements to select aviation media outlets portraying Mallory as a dedicated professional, railroaded by an overzealous inspector. He hinted at a potential lawsuit against the FAA for defamation and wrongful suspension. The battle lines were being drawn. On one side, Inspector Althea Harris and the full weight of the FAA meticulously building a case based on regulations, eyewitness testimony, and professional conduct standards. On the other, Captain Rick Mallory and his high-powered lawyer preparing to fight back with denials, counter-accusations, and legal maneuvering. The twist was no longer just about the initial confrontation. It was about the system itself being tested. Could a pilot with Mallory's record and backing successfully bulldoze his way through the charges, or would the quiet, methodical investigation by Inspector Harris uncover truths that even Mallory himself had long buried? The digging had begun, and what it would unearth threatened to shake the foundations of Mallory's career, and potentially shine an uncomfortable light on Global Sky Airlines. The stakes were rising, and the karma delayed, but not denied, was slowly, inexorably making its way towards him. While Captain Mallory and his lawyer Julian Vance publicly projected an image of aggrieved innocence through curated leaks and defiant statements, the FAA's investigation delved deep. Inspector Harris and her team meticulously combed through Mallory's extensive personnel file, obtained from a cooperating Global Sky Airlines. Buried within years of routine check-ride reports was a document that resonated chillingly with Harris's own experience, a formal complaint filed 3 years prior by a junior flight attendant named Maria Sanchez. The complaint detailed an incident during a layover in Hong Kong. Captain Mallory had allegedly subjected Sanchez to demeaning comments about her ethnicity and appearance in front of other crew. When she requested him to stop, he had erupted in verbal abuse, threatening her job. Global Sky's response had been a cursory verbal warning for Mallory and a token online sensitivity module. Feeling unsupported and intimidated, Sanchez had resigned 6 months later, citing a toxic work environment. For Inspector Harris, this was a crucial discovery. "This isn't an isolated incident, Marcus," she told her superior Thorne, presenting the file. "This is a pattern of abuse, particularly towards women he perceives as subordinate." Thorne agreed. Sanchez's testimony could be vital. Locating Maria Sanchez required effort. She had left aviation entirely and now owned a small bakery in New Mexico. When an FAA investigator finally reached her, Sanchez was initially reluctant to revisit the painful memories. However, upon learning the details of Inspector Harris's encounter, another woman of color facing Mallory's ire, a spark of resolve ignited. He thought he was untouchable, Sanchez said, her voice trembling yet firm. The airline did almost nothing. If my story can prevent him from doing this to someone else, if it can support Inspector Harris, then yes, I will provide a formal statement. I will testify. Sanchez's decision to come forward dealt a significant blow to Mallory's defense strategy, which hinged on portraying Harris as a lone, oversensitive accuser. Now, a documented history of similar behavior was emerging. Adding to Mallory's woes was First Officer Kenji Tanaka's unwavering testimony. Despite Vance's attempts to paint him as impressionable or disloyal, Tanaka's calm, factual account of the cockpit incident remained consistent and credible. He also, with reluctance but honesty, detailed the earlier incident at Charles de Gaulle Airport, where Mallory had publicly berated a female gate agent to tears over a minor issue. This was later corroborated by a brief note in the Paris station's log. Each piece of evidence, seemingly minor on its own, contributed to an undeniable mosaic of unprofessional and aggressive conduct. Within Global Sky Airlines, the tide was turning against Mallory. Captain Ava Rostova, initially focused on mitigating corporate damage, grew increasingly disturbed by the accumulating evidence, particularly Sanchez's formal statement. The airline's legal team began to view Mallory less as an asset to be defended and more as a significant liability whose past actions had been inadequately addressed by the company itself. The personal cost for Mallory was also mounting steeply. Suspended without pay, his once comfortable financial situation deteriorated rapidly. Mortgage payments loomed, the lavish lifestyle he maintained was under threat, and the stress was immense. His wife Carol, initially supportive, started asking probing, difficult questions as their savings dwindled and the severity of the allegations became clearer. Mallory grew increasingly irritable, his sleep plagued by anxiety, his evenings by excessive drinking. The confident swagger was replaced by a haunted, fretful demeanor. Sensing the shifting dynamics and the strengthening case against his client, Julian Vance pragmatically advised Mallory to consider a settlement. "Rick," he urged, "perhaps we can negotiate a lengthy suspension, intensive retraining, and counseling. It's better than risking a full revocation and a finding of discrimination." But Mallory, blinded by pride and an unshakable belief in his own righteousness, exploded. "Settle, that's admitting guilt," he raged. "I did nothing wrong. Harris is out to get me. Sanchez is a disgruntled liar, and Tanaka is a backstabbing opportunist. We fight this, Julian, all the way." Vance sighed. Mallory's obstinacy and utter lack of introspection were becoming his greatest enemies. The walls, meticulously built on years of unchecked arrogance, were cracking, yet Mallory seemed determined to remain within them until they collapsed entirely. Inspector Harris, observing these developments, felt a quiet, somber sense of professional validation. It was never about personal revenge, but about upholding standards and ensuring accountability. Maria Sanchez's courage deeply moved her, reinforcing her conviction that she was not just fighting for herself, but for all those who had suffered in silence under such abuses of power. The investigation was peeling back layers, revealing a truth far more damaging than a single confrontation, and the momentum of karma was steadily, irrevocably building against Rick Mallory. The FAA hearing room exuded an air of solemn authority, its dark wood paneling and imposing table setting a stark stage for the day's proceedings. On one side sat the FAA panel, 3 senior officials, including Marcus Thorne, their expressions carefully neutral. Inspector Althea Harris, accompanied by FAA legal counsel, prepared to present her case. Opposite them, Captain Rick Mallory sat with his lawyer, Julian Vance. Mallory attempted a facade of composure, but the telltale tightness around his eyes betrayed the immense strain. The charges were read unprofessional conduct, failure to comply with FAA directives creating a hostile environment, and the deeply serious allegation of discriminatory behavior. Inspector Harris was called first. She recounted the events on Flight 327 with clarity and precision, detailing Mallory's aggressive demeanor, his dismissive language, and his immediate escalation without due process. "My decision to ground the aircraft," she stated firmly, "was based on Captain Mallory's demonstrated lack of judgment and emotional control, rendering him, in my professional opinion, unfit to command that flight." Julian Vance's cross-examination aimed to paint Harris as overzealous. "Inspector," he probed, "isn't it true that a captain's primary concern is security, especially with an unidentified individual in the cockpit moments before departure? A captain's concern should manifest as adherence to procedure, including polite inquiry and verification of credentials, Mr. Vance," Harris countered calmly. "Captain Mallory made no such inquiry before demanding my removal. His response was not procedural, it was hostile." Vance's attempts to portray Mallory as merely a diligent captain under pressure faltered against Harris's unwavering factual testimony. First Officer Kenji Tanaka's testimony, delivered via video conference, powerfully corroborated Harris's account. He described Mallory's instant animosity and the captain's refusal to even consider that the woman before him might have legitimate authority. Tanaka also confirmed under questioning previous instances of Mallory's temper, notably the berating of a gate agent in Paris, which helped establish a pattern. The most emotionally charged testimony came from Maria Sanchez, also appearing remotely. Her voice, though initially trembling, gained strength as she recounted the Hong Kong incident, Mallory's demeaning slurs, his verbal abuse when she challenged him, and his chilling threats to her career. He acted as if he were untouchable. Sanchez stated, her gaze steady. "The way he treated Inspector Harris, it was a sickening echo of what I endured. It was clear he believed some people were beneath his respect." Vance attempted to discredit her as a disgruntled former employee. Sanchez met his insinuations head-on. "I resigned, Mr. Vance, because Global Sky chose to protect a man like Captain Mallory rather than support its staff. I seek nothing from this but accountability so others don't suffer his abuse." Her dignified and heartfelt testimony visibly moved the panel. When Captain Mallory took the stand, he clung stubbornly to his version of events, portraying himself as the victim of a misunderstanding and an inspector with an agenda. "My record speaks for itself," he declared, attempting to project authority. 25 years of dedicated safe flying. If my tone was misconstrued in a high-stress situation, I regret that, but the accusations of discrimination are baseless and offensive. He offered no genuine remorse, no flicker of self-awareness. Under direct questioning from the panel about the Sanchez incident, his composure frayed. He dismissively waved it off as old news and a minor issue that was handled internally. His arrogance and defensiveness did him no favors. A brief statement from Global Sky's HR representative confirmed the details of Sanchez's complaint and the superficial nature of the airline's resolution, at the time a tacit admission of past institutional failure. After all testimony concluded, the panel adjourned to deliberate. The wait was agonizing for Mallory. Pacing a small anteroom, his earlier bluster evaporated, replaced by a raw, visible anxiety. Vance offered quiet, unconvincing reassurances. Finally, they were recalled. The presiding FAA official addressed Mallory, his voice grave. "Captain Mallory, this panel has meticulously reviewed all evidence and testimony. We find the accounts provided by Inspector Harris, First Officer Tanaka, and Ms. Maria Sanchez to be credible and compelling." He paused, the silence in the room absolute. "Regarding the incident on Global Sky Flight 327, we find you engaged in profoundly unprofessional conduct, demonstrating a disturbing lack of judgment and an unacceptable level of aggression, unbecoming a pilot in command. Furthermore, considering the totality of the evidence, including the pattern of behavior highlighted by Ms. Sanchez, this panel affirms a substantive basis for the finding of discriminatory conduct. Your actions were not merely a lapse in security protocol, they were tainted by bias and constituted a gross abuse of your command authority." Mallory visibly sagged. The official delivered the final devastating blow. "Therefore, it is the decision of this panel that your airline transport pilot certificate is hereby revoked, effective immediately." Revoked. The word seemed to drain all life from Mallory. He swayed, catching the edge of the table for support. Vance began to speak of appeals, but the finality of the judgment was clear. Inspector Harris watched a complex wave of emotions washing over her. Relief, a somber sense of vindication, but no joy. A career was over, a necessary and just outcome, but a sobering one nonetheless. Stripped of his wings, his identity, and his future in the skies, Rick Mallory was escorted from the room, a man utterly broken by the weight of his own actions. The initial karma of a grounded flight had now culminated in this ultimate career-ending retribution. The FAA's stark verdict revocation of Captain Rick Mallory's airline transport pilot certificate reverberated through Global Sky Airlines and the aviation community. Such a severe penalty underscored the FAA's zero-tolerance stance on the conduct witnessed. For Mallory, this wasn't just a professional judgment. It was the trigger for his life's complete implosion. Julian Vance, his attorney, immediately launched an appeal, though privately he knew overturning an FAA revocation buttressed by such compelling corroborated evidence, especially one including a formal finding of discrimination, was a near impossible feat. The legal battle became a grueling, expensive ordeal that quickly eroded Mallory's finances, with his income abruptly severed and legal fees mounting. The facade of his affluent life crumbled. His suburban home was sold under duress, the proceeds barely covering debts. He and his wife Carol moved into a cramped, rented apartment, a stark symbol of his fall. The man Mallory had become embittered, steeped in self-pity, and venomously blaming everyone but himself, proved unbearable for Carol. His constant tirades against Inspector Harris, Maria Sanchez, Kenji Tanaka, and the institutions he felt had wronged him poisoned their home. Eventually, she filed for divorce, severing ties with the man whose arrogance had led them to ruin. Socially, Mallory became a pariah. Former colleagues distanced themselves, and the aviation world, where reputation spread swiftly, marked him as toxic. The few who remained often fueled his sense of grievance, rather than prompting any introspection. The consequences, however, rippled far beyond Mallory's personal desolation. Global Sky Airlines found itself under a harsh spotlight. The public revelation of the Maria Sanchez incident during Mallory's hearing exposed a glaring past failure in their HR processes and their negligent handling of misconduct by senior personnel. Aviation unions and advocacy groups cited the Mallory case as emblematic of deeper systemic issues within the industry, leading to public concern and a temporary dip in the airline's stock. Captain Eva Rostova, director of flight operations, met the challenge head-on. Profoundly disturbed by the depth of Mallory's misconduct and the airline's past complicity through inaction, she initiated a comprehensive overhaul. This included a review of reporting mechanisms for harassment and discrimination, a revamp of disciplinary procedures, and the introduction of mandatory intensive workshops for all flight crew on unconscious bias, respect, and ethical leadership. The era of the old boys club at Global Sky was declared over. These reforms, though costly and initially met with some resistance, signaled a genuine commitment to cultural change. The story of The Captain, the Inspector, and the Grounded 777 quickly became a potent cautionary tale integrated into training programs industry-wide. In stark contrast to Mallory's descent, the other key figures found their paths altered in more positive, albeit sometimes challenging ways. Inspector Althea Harris received commendations within the FAA for her unwavering professionalism and courage. Though she shied away from personal aggrandizement, she became an influential voice at aviation safety conferences, her enhanced reputation cementing her as a figure of integrity and leading to further advancement within the FAA. First Officer Kenji Tanaka, despite some initial awkwardness from a few old guard pilots who viewed him as a turncoat, earned widespread respect for his honesty. Global Sky Management under Rostova quietly ensured his integrity did not impede his career. He progressed steadily, becoming an informal mentor who championed ethical conduct. Maria Sanchez, having confronted her past trauma by testifying, discovered a renewed sense of purpose. She became a volunteer advocate, helping others navigate workplace harassment, her courage transforming a painful past into a source of strength. The appeal process for Rick Mallory eventually sputtered to its inevitable conclusion. The FAA's decision was upheld. The revocation was permanent. His attempts to find any aviation-related employment, from ground operations to simulator instruction, were futile. The FAA record, particularly the discrimination finding, rendered him unemployable in the field he once dominated. Ultimately, he found work in the anonymity of a warehouse, a physically demanding, low-paying job that was a constant bitter reminder of his spectacular fall. He who had once commanded the skies was now lost in a sea of cardboard boxes, his days a monotonous grind. The world of aviation continued its dynamic pace, reforming and evolving. Rick Mallory, however, was left marooned in the wreckage of a life self-destructed by a few fateful minutes of unchecked prejudice and arrogance. The hard karma had not been a single blow, but a meticulous, relentless dismantling of his entire existence, leaving him with only the taste of regret and the enduring weight of his actions. Years passed, the echoes of Captain Rick Mallory's downfall reshaping corners of the aviation world. For Althea Harris, the incident became a cornerstone of her FAA career. Promoted to a management role within the Flight Standards District Office, she spearheaded initiatives championing diversity, respect, and robust safety cultures. Her influence extended to policy and training, her work a testament to how one principled stand could catalyze systemic improvement, ensuring others felt empowered to act with similar conviction. Global Sky Airlines, driven by Captain Eva Rostova, underwent a profound cultural metamorphosis. The internal Mallory report laid bare past complacency, spurring the implementation of intensive mandatory training workshops focused on unconscious bias and respectful leadership. Revamped whistleblower protections created safer channels for reporting misconduct. Though met with initial friction, these changes slowly rebuilt Global Sky's reputation, positioning it as an industry proponent of a more inclusive and ethical workplace. The saga of Flight N729GS became a permanent stark lesson in their training curriculum. Kenji Tanaka, embodying the integrity he'd displayed, eventually became a captain at Global Sky. His cockpit was renowned for open communication and fairness. He never overtly spoke of the Mallory affair, but his mentorship of junior pilots subtly instilled the critical values of ethical conduct and the courage to uphold standards regardless of rank. His career was a quiet testament to professionalism prevailing. Maria Sanchez found an unexpected empowerment after confronting her past. Though she never returned to flying, she channeled her experience into advocacy, volunteering to support others facing workplace harassment. Her small bakery thrived, a symbol of her resilience and her transformation of pain into purpose. For Rick Mallory, however, the horizon remained bleak. His appeals were exhausted. The revocation of his pilot's license was absolute and permanent. His marriage ended, leaving him isolated with his corrosive bitterness. He toiled in the anonymity of a warehouse job each day, a stark contrast to the authority and prestige he once commanded. He never found peace or accepted responsibility, instead clinging to a narrative of victimhood. He became a forgotten footnote, a whispered, cautionary tale in aviation circles, the embodiment of arrogance leading to ruin. His karma wasn't a swift stroke, but a relentless grinding consequence that defined the remainder of his days. The aircraft, N779GS, continued its decades of service, a silent steel witness. For those who knew its story, it was a constant reminder. The character of those in command is as vital as the airworthiness of the machine. It underscored that authority is a profound responsibility and that the most perilous storms can be those brewed by unchecked ego and prejudice within the human heart. The aviation world subtly changed by the lessons learned, flew on a little wiser, a little more, just because of the turbulence that had once engulfed one flight and the pilot who had steered himself into its unforgiving eye. And there you have it, a story of arrogance, prejudice, and the unyielding power of karma in the high-stakes world of aviation. Captain Mallory thought his authority was absolute, but Inspector Althea Harris proved that integrity and justice can bring even the loftiest egos crashing back to earth. What did you think of Mallory's downfall? Did he get what he deserved? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. This story of drama twists and hard-hitting consequences resonated with you. Please give this video a thumbs up. It really helps the channel. Don't forget to share it with anyone who loves a gripping tale of justice served. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next deep dive into compelling stories. Thanks for watching, and fly safe in your own journeys.